Hello and welcome to Newswire, Afghanistan Special. I'm Jawad Tehami. After taking over Afghanistan's capital Kabul with no resistance whatsoever, the Taliban have underscored their commitment to peace and human rights, saying they do not want to live in isolation and seek friendly relations with the world. In their first news conference after the takeover, the group's spokesman Zabiullah Mujahid promised to protect women's rights and press freedom. Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar, the group's co-founder and now the deputy leader, has also arrived in Kabul from Qatar, but the vice president of the deposed government, Amrullah Saleh, said under the constitution he should be in charge because President Ashraf Ghani has fled the country. Earlier, amid widespread criticism, U.S. President Joe Biden said that he stands squarely behind his decision of the troops' withdrawal. Now, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has said that the Taliban will be judged on their actions and not their words. The European Union acknowledged the group's victory, saying it is ready to begin talks with the group. Now, Pakistan has reiterated its position of a peaceful and inclusive political settlement in the war-torn country. And to talk more about the developments regarding Afghanistan, I am joined by Dr. Jeffrey Stacey, former State Department official, Obama administration, and United Nations lead consultant in Central and South Asia, and Ms. Amina Khan, Director, Center for Afghanistan, Middle East and Africa at the Institute of Strategic Studies, Islamabad. Thank you, both of you, for your time at Newswire. I'll begin the discussion with you, Dr. Stacey, as Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar has arrived in Afghanistan and the formation of a new government seems at hand, but at the same time, the vice president of the deposed government has claimed the presidency in a caretaker role. Do you think there might be some trouble in coming days?
First of all, it's a pleasure to be with you. I wish I was there in studio for some good Pakistani tea. I mean, it's my experience, it's even better than what I find in London. But to answer your very serious question.
Thank you very much for your time at Newswire, and we really look forward to you to be with us in studio sometime in the future.
Very well, but we have a fraught situation, obviously, across the border, and we have really an opportunity for Pakistan to play a leadership role here, as well as Qatar, Turkey, a few others. The influence of the West is a bit diminished for all the obvious reasons, but it really is now a question after a remarkable intelligence operation that I think will probably go down as one of the most successful in the modern era. I was just remarking about the incredibly fraught situation across the border in Afghanistan, and that is obvious to everyone. There is an opportunity here for a few key countries, Pakistan, Qatar, Turkey, and as well as the United Nations, to play a role in helping keep the Taliban to their word. There has been a remarkable and successful intelligence operation that probably will go down as one of the most successful in the modern era. And Pakistan now, with increased influence, comes increased responsibility.
So, Dr. Stacey, I will beg your pardon for the interruption. Why do you call it a successful intelligence operation rather than it was a political sort of engagement Pakistan had been involved in order to facilitate the intra-Afghan talks, and before that, bringing the Taliban on the negotiating table?
Well, that is true. And Pakistan, that's why I say there's an opportunity for continued statesmanship for Mr. Khan and the government. That is true that Pakistan has been crucial in convincing the Taliban to engage in the talks in Doha. But it really is a remarkable multiple level game that has been played. It is what it is. And I think the opportunity now, with the increased influence that Pakistan sought and now has received, it has an opportunity to, for example, avoid the sanctions that are being discussed as the Western intelligence operations wake up to what has happened. And really, it's time, I think, for Pakistan to lead and help lead an international trusteeship with the Taliban, because Mr. Saleh is in the Panjshir Valley with Mr. Massoud, and maybe they now have the time, and the clocks are now in the hands
Dr.
of
Stacey,
the Taliban.
why sanctions are being discussed against Pakistan? I mean, Pakistan had been the front-line ally with the U.S. in the war on terror. Pakistan facilitated everything that the U.S. wanted to secure the interests in the region, and particularly Afghanistan. We saw that the U.S. wanted Pakistan to facilitate the Afghan peace process, and Mr. Zalmay Khalilzad, the U.S. Special Envoy to Afghanistan, had very frequent visits to Pakistan. So why, despite all the facilitation and the positive efforts put in by the Pakistani political leadership, and what you also call at multiple levels, so why sanctions are being discussed in the U.S.?
Well, they aren't being officially discussed. They're being discussed more in Islamabad and Lahore and Karachi than they are in Washington, London, or Berlin. I know so because I've been speaking with friends in Pakistan, and there are rumors all around Islamabad about coming sanctions. That's what I refer to. So there's a fear among
Dr. Stacey, you just mentioned that the intelligence operations over there, or the intelligence structure over there in the U.S. just woke up to what happened in Afghanistan. So I just want you to elaborate that one a little bit.
Well, it's not being discussed publicly, but Western intelligence operations have woken up to what Pakistan, Russia, China, and Iran have done, and essentially, it is what it is. And
I'll take this point to Ms. Amina. So you've just heard what Dr. Stacey has to say. The point is that Pakistan's political leadership has been actively involved on the request of the Americans that it should facilitate the Afghan peace process. And now the Taliban have taken over Kabul. And now, all of a sudden, we've just heard the voices coming from America. The sanctions are being discussed to be imposed on Pakistan. What do you say about it?
First of all, let me just begin by saying that Pakistan's relationship with the Taliban is an open secret. Our relationship with the Taliban is known, and while our policy may have been inconsistent on other issues, certainly on the Afghan equation, Pakistan has been very clear. From day one, we have been saying that there can be no military solution, and whether we like it or not, talks will have to happen with the Taliban, and they will have to be accommodated politically. Now, it is extremely unfortunate that it has taken the international community more than 20 years of bloodshed, and not to mention the trillions of dollars that have been wasted to realize this. Now, having said that, let's be very honest here. The day the Americans signed the agreement with the Taliban, that is the day that they officially legitimized them. Number one. Number two, again, the day the Americans began to execute the Doha Agreement, in the absence of getting assurances from the Taliban when it came to certain issues such as the ceasefire, and of course pushing forwards on the intra-Afghan talks towards a political settlement. Again, that is the day that the Taliban became emboldened. If the Taliban have delivered, they have delivered on one front, and that is not to attack American forces. And they've been doing this. If anything, before the so-called takeover, they were attacking only Afghan national security forces. Now, I think it is very naive, and I would say it is unfair of the Americans to, I think, push the entire onus or the responsibility of Afghanistan now on the region, and more so Pakistan. It is unfortunate that the relationship between Washington and Islamabad has always been viewed through a very narrow lens, and that has been the Afghan equation. And I don't see, much change in that, number one. Number two, there is regional consensus on Afghanistan. We've seen regional countries step up and they have been engaging with the Taliban. But I think no country is willing to step up and take the role of the US. The US came to Afghanistan with a mandate, and unfortunately they have not fulfilled that. They have left in a very irresponsible manner. They have shifted the onus onto regional countries, and as I said, Pakistan has always been a convenient and easy scapegoat. And I think this is naive of the Americans to do so, because they will have to engage with Pakistan even post-exit. The Taliban, from what I am hearing, have established a good workable relationship. Again, I'll come back to the point when...
Okay, Ms. Amina, I'll take this point. I'll come back to you. Dr. Stacey, Ms. Amina is of the view that over the last 2 decades, the U.S. and its allies over there in Afghanistan were not able to capitalize on what their actually objective was when they came over here. And as the then President George W. Bush said, that these carefully targeted actions are designed to disrupt the use of Afghanistan as a terrorist base of operations and to attack the military capability of the Taliban regime. Later on, we saw that this particular objective turning into the nation building over there. So, I mean, was there lack of clarity what the U.S. was up to, not having the realization of the ground realities in Afghanistan and coming all the way over here? And after 2 decades of war, when the Taliban have taken over, the officials over there are very keen to scapegoat Pakistan.
Yes, and first I must hasten to remark that I do not speak for the U.S. government. I'm merely a friend of all countries in the region, Pakistan, Afghanistan, my own, and others. Ms. Amina is 100% correct in everything that she stated. It is true that the U.S. bears the lion's share of responsibility for the debacle in Afghanistan. Numerous mistakes, serious mistakes, grave mistakes have been made for decades, especially in the last 2 years, especially by the Trump administration, and I dare say by my former colleagues in the current administration. And she's quite correct. So it is true that the West has mismanaged the situation, is bearing the majority of the responsibility for what has taken place. And now really the interests of all have really aligned. We have in Kandahar, in Mazar, in Herat, in Jalalabad, in Kabul, the Taliban. And the Taliban now are, as the spokesman that we haven't seen in years, quite impressively stated to the world, has turned a new leaf. It is now the responsibility of all of us, especially those with the most influence, to hold them to account and to ensure that stability, peace, and government operations in terms of serving their citizens go on as before. Who has the most influence? Pakistan, Qatar, Turkey, and obviously Russia, China, and Iran. So what we need to do, really, is have the UN spearhead an international trusteeship, and Pakistan can play a statesman-like role in an operation such as this. We see the Taliban in Kabul in front of the cameras behaving one way, and as close as Jalalabad and Kandahar and other places, quite a different way. This is now in front of the world. The opportunity is with increased influence, there is increased responsibility. And Pakistan can do this, Qatar can do this, Turkey can do this. I'm afraid the U.S. for a while cannot do this because the points made are quite correct.
So, Dr. Stacey, when you talk about the prime responsibility, do you think that it falls only on the shoulder of Pakistan being the neighbor of Afghanistan, or even on the Americans more of so because they had been over here for the last 2 decades, and the war they did have over here in Afghanistan. And clearly, people of Afghanistan seem quite angered when President Biden said that the objective of this war was never nation building.
Right. You're quite right, Jawad. And what I meant, responsibility of those who the Taliban trust. And so allow me to qualify it in that way. But you're quite right. In terms of overall responsibility, the U.S. bears the most because it has had the most influence. It has made the gravest mistakes in one way of looking at this. So that is quite correct. And what I refer to is the very immediate future. Who has the opportunity to wield influence with the modernized Taliban? There is time for the U.S., the UK, Germany, France, others to join Pakistan, Qatar, Turkey, with the UN really in the lead. There's an opportunity for the Secretary General Gutierrez. I hope he will come to Kabul, come soon, and then set up an international trusteeship with the Taliban in which the Pakistan, among others, can play an immediate role. And then, of course, the West must join in because of the very responsibility to which you refer.
Okay, Dr. Stacey, I'll go to Ms. Amina. Ms. Amina, when Dr. Stacey talks about the prime responsibility of holding the new Taliban in Afghanistan accountable for what they have said in the very first press conference they had, I mean, Pakistan has consistently been saying that Pakistan can only be a facilitator for peace in Afghanistan, but not a guarantor. So what do you say about that?
First of all, I do agree with Jeffrey to some extent that there has to be a shared responsibility. Yes, the Americans came, and with all due respect, Jeffrey, they made a mess. We weren't expecting the Americans to leave in such a haphazard manner. But yes, it's the region, and the region has to deal with Afghanistan because, you see, the region is not what it used to be. There are now so many actors, there are new players, and regional rivalries have increased. And naturally, if there is instability in Afghanistan, it is going to affect the entire region, and not just Pakistan and Iran, which have always been, unfortunately affected by events in neighboring Afghanistan. And that is what you have seen now, that there is some sort of a regional consensus on Afghanistan, which includes Afghanistan's immediate neighbors, and that is China, Russia, Iran, Pakistan, and the Central Asian states. However, the question now comes here is that which country can be viewed as a credible interlocutor, or can there be some sort of a regional mechanism or framework that could make all parties, I will not just say the Taliban, because we are all hoping for an inclusive setup, and all regional countries have said they will not accept the Taliban coming in militarily. There is no other way but to form an inclusive setup. So this is important. But here, I think, yes, Pakistan certainly can play an important role. But look, I've said this before, and I feel like I'm an old record here. Pakistan is damned if it does, and it's damned if it doesn't. Because of the historical baggage Pakistan has, we have to keep, a little distance from what is happening in Afghanistan. Whatever happens in Afghanistan, whichever political dispensation comes through the will of the people and through consensus, Pakistan will support it. Now, apart from Pakistan, I think Iran and Russia equally have historical baggage. Now, there is one country that could play that role, and that is China. Now, that might not settle down too well with the Americans, but the fact is that the Chinese are viewed positively, not only by the different Afghan political factions, but more so by the Taliban. And I think it is also another important point here is, before I forget, is that yes, accountability, making all sides work, that is important. But I think the Taliban are not the group that they were 2 decades ago. They have really evolved. They have, I always say this, learned the art of diplomacy, and they know that if it's one wrong step, they are not going to get that recognition and legitimacy they so badly need, not only from the international community, but more so from the region. Because once they have the support from the region, that is when they'll be able to actually, form a government and move on. So again, I will say, this is not the time for bickering. This is the time for the Americans to say that there is still time to situation. Go back to Qatar. We're hearing about this so-called inclusive political setup. The Americans should broker it, including having consensus of the regional countries. And then there should be a monitoring network, and that could be maybe the UN or even a regional framework, the TRIOCA Plus. There are ways to do it, but instead of shifting the blame, there has to be collective and shared responsibility.
Okay, Dr. Stacey, what is the general sentiment over there in the United States? Because you've been the part of the Obama administration. I mean, there was some sort of an effort which was made under the Obama administration, and there was a deadline for the start of the troops withdrawal also announced by the then president. So why it couldn't be pulled off?
Well, again, I concur with my colleague, Ms. Amina. This is a time, and I completely agree, it is not about assessing blame or bickering. It is about, I apologize for the noise. It is about moving forward and looking forward. And various countries, I'm afraid, I take your point, Ms. Amina, that not only the U.S., but possibly Pakistan needs to play a more behind-the-scenes role for the moment. And we have to do what we have to do in terms of the opportunities that lie before us now. So it really is an opportunity for the UN to take the lead. And Qatar obviously was appointed by the Afghan Contact Group as the principal interlocutor and broker. They have also considerable influence with the emerging government in Kabul, and in Washington. Well, as you can imagine, it's really how do I say this? I can't use the word that I want to. It is a mess, and the egg that has come all over the face of the U.S. president and the administration, and now causing political problems for this administration, is considerable. And these mistakes were foreseen by some of us, but unfortunately, it's a difficult world, and geostrategy and statecraft doesn't always work out with the best intentions. But we have to do what we have to do with the opportunity that lies before us. That includes the U.S., that includes the West, that includes Pakistan, South Asia, Central Asia, the Gulf region, and really working with Abdullah and Hamid Karzai and Mr. Hekmatyar is a way forward, and obviously Mr. Baradar and his colleagues, and with the UN in the lead and countries helping all around, we have an opportunity, because this is apparently a Taliban 2.0. And I have been impressed, I must say, that they called up the mayor of Kabul and said, please stay in your position. Please continue to do all your work. And in Tolo News, a female journalist, broadcaster, host interviewed a high-ranking member of the Talibs right live on the air. So we have an opportunity in our hands, and we need to use it. And however subtle certain countries need to be at first, that is a good point. Others can step forward, but there is an opportunity, quite ironically, to have a stable, peaceful, prosperous Afghanistan, relations with all its neighbors, including Pakistan, in a way that really none of us foresaw, because as close as a couple of years ago, when the breakthrough happened with the Eid ceasefire, that is what surprised all of us. Surprised you, my friends, it surprised me, it surprised all of us, and taught all of us that peace is possible. The fact that this was squandered by the Biden administration was a particular surprise, continuing the mistakes that Trump had been making. So I agree. Let's move forward. Let's join hands, ideally with the UN in the lead, and let's work on building a prosperous Afghanistan and a prosperous region there in Central South Asia.
Dr. Stacey, point well taken, and we'll resume the discussion from here, but right after a short break. Stay tuned with us. Welcome back to Newswire. I'm Jawad Tehami and I'm joined by Dr. Jeffrey Stacey, former State Department official in the Obama administration and the United Nations lead consultant in Central and South Asia, and Ms. Amina Khan, Director, Center for Afghanistan, Middle East and Africa at the Institute of Strategic Studies, Islamabad. Thank you for being with me. Dr. Stacey and Ms. Amina, the press conference that Zabiullah Mujahid had after the takeover, he made a lot of promises. So I would like to go a little deeper into what he actually promised. The women's rights issues under the previous Taliban regime had been under scrutiny. Now they have promised that they will protect women's rights, but within the framework of Islam. Ms. Amina, first you go ahead. What does that exactly mean?
Look, first of all, I think the proof of the pudding is in the eating. So let us be cautiously optimistic here. The Taliban are saying all the right things, all the things that I think everybody, not only in Afghanistan, but of course the international community and the region want to see. I think it is important to give them, a chance. Yes, there's a lot of mistrust that comes with anything that comes out of the man's mouth, specifically because of their previous, atrocities that they have committed, and nobody's absolving them. But then if you look at the entire history of Afghanistan, even people within the last two governments were equally responsible. And I'm not going to mention names because I think we're all a very learned audience here. It is important for the Taliban to stick to the promises that they have made and the pledges they have made regarding women, regarding, minorities. And the fact, it's important to realize that the fact that the Taliban are even talking about these things, they mentioned them back in 2018 and 2019 in Moscow. This in itself is a change within the group. And as we just said, the Taliban, majority of the leadership has been living in Qatar. Their children are going to co-education schools. So the Taliban have hopefully evolved. We are hopefully optimistic, and we're seeing some very good, scenes coming from Kabul. And the fact, not just Kabul, but overall Afghanistan. And the fact that this so-called takeover was relatively peaceful. Look, we haven't seen large-scale exodus of refugees. If there has been internal displacement. And I think that to somewhat has been slightly exaggerated because of the fear that comes with hearing the word, the Talib or the Taliban. So I think so far so good. And again, I am convinced that the Taliban, maybe if they did want to revert to their old ways, would not want to, simply because right now they need the international community and the region on their side. They need that legitimacy. And as I said before, one wrong move and they know that then it's going to cause problems. So I think the Taliban need to be given a chance. And again, we should be cautiously optimistic. There can be regional mechanisms to make the Taliban deliver. But, let's give the group a chance.
But Ms. Amina, as you already said, that there was no bloodshed as soon as the Taliban were taking over Kabul. That's in fact very true. But what about those people who were running for their life? I mean, what they were afraid from? I mean, we saw very chaotic scenes coming from the Kabul airport.
I did. Look, I'm in touch with a lot of people in Kabul. My friends are in Kabul, and the fact is that, I think, again, there is a lot of propaganda. There is a lot of fear that has been created. And from what I know, somebody made an announcement that there's a plane that's going to America and it's giving citizenship and passports, and everybody ran. And I think that was extremely silly of them to do so, because when they got onto the plane wasn't going to stop for them. Number two, you saw a representative of the Taliban coming on Tolo News, by the way, of all the networks, Tolo News. And that, again, just shows you the change. Speaking to a female anchor and saying that, all these people that are sitting outside these foreign embassies waiting to be taken in, why are they leaving their own country? We assure them that they will be looked after. So I think I do not understand why these people want to leave the country. They're not going to have a better life in, another country. They will always be treated as second-class citizens. I understand the fear that comes with the Taliban, but this is a transition process, and so far, relatively smooth. And you will always have elements within either side causing problems. But I think now is the time to be cautiously optimistic and patient and let's see how things unravel.
Okay, Dr. Stacey, as the Taliban have promised that they would be protecting women's rights as well. Likewise, they promised that press freedom also. Zabiullah Mujahid said, we are committed to the media within our cultural frameworks. Now, looking at these both statements, somewhere we find ifs and buts attached to that promise as well. What do you say?
Well, that's right. Taliban 2.0 is brand new. We haven't seen this brand before, and we haven't seen these principles laid out before. So really, I would suggest a different approach. Let's not trust. Let's actually verify. And we'll give them a chance, but already I think we're all quite aware that outside the glare of the cameras, there are things taking place. There's not violence in terms of two sides fighting, but there are continued assassinations. There are continued acts of violence short of assassination in multiple cities across the country, less so Kabul, more so in others. It is what it is. This is why the Taliban, who have at times had very successful command and control right down to the lowest level commanders and fighters on the battlefield. At other times, they've had much less. This is one of those times where the Taliban themselves were surprised to be in Kabul 3 weeks earlier than they had planned. There are lots of reasons for that. We may or may not want to get into them. They too were surprised at how quickly they were inside the palace. So they are scrambling like you can't believe. They have a very light hold on all the territory supposedly in their hands. But they are trying anew. And that is where an international trusteeship led by the UN, supported by Pakistan, the US, and everyone else, is now incumbent upon all of us.
So, Dr. Stacey, as you just mentioned, that the Taliban themselves were surprised by their quick advance in the takeover of Kabul. I mean, 3 weeks ahead of the time they had predicted for themselves. I mean, doesn't it raise a lot of questions? I mean, when they have taken the capital so quickly with no resistance whatsoever, what does that depict? I mean, the kinds of funds the US had been pumping into training of the Afghan national forces, and there was no resistance whatsoever. What does that depict, actually?
Well, that depicts the deals of diplomats and intelligence operators. What happened was it was actually the US, not the ISI, not the CIA. It was Tony Blinken who called up Ghani and said, look, you've got to stay and die or go now. So he was actually pushed by the US. And then in something that's not become public yet, the US did a deal with the Taliban. They said, look, if you won't attack us and won't attack the interpreters and their families or Western forces, you can come in and take over now. That's the deal they made. That's why they came in so quickly, even before the Taliban were prepared. So there are multiple levels at all times in the international arena, particularly in Afghanistan in the last 3 weeks. It is what it is. That's why it's important now, as we are, of course, Jawad, worried about, where's Ghani? Oh, he's in the UAE. I mean, we do have lots of questions about how things went down. But what's ironic and perhaps historic, well, I guess it's intrinsically historic, is how many interests have aligned at this time, really across the board. So let's, with the reins we all have in our hands, let's use this opportunity for good. Let's hold the Taliban accountable. And if they continue to earn our trust as we verify their words, let's work with them. Let's build primarily a national unity government, and then we can go from there.
Okay, Ms. Amina, Dr. Stacey is of the view that there was a back-channel deal between the Afghan Taliban and the US, and that probably gave a smooth coming into the Taliban over there in Kabul. I mean, how do you analyze that? I mean, there is something that is not made public as yet.
Well, honestly, I don't think it needs to be made public. It's common sense, and I think Jeffrey, it's understood.
Don't you think that would
was
be injustice to the American people if American president is making such type of deal? I mean, there should be a question mark from the Americans over the last 2 decades, what you had been doing over there, and all of a sudden you make a deal with those people you went against.
Look, there's room and there's time for a lot of introspection, and you just can't blame the Biden administration because he has inherited this war. The point is that does it really matter what deals were made, what wasn't made? The fact is that I think, Afghanistan in general has suffered for far too long. And I think there are major mistakes that the Americans have made. And I think they do realize that these mistakes have been made. But again, if we keep on going into this thing of who did what, it is really counterproductive. It's important now at this particular stage. I think there is a historic opportunity in Afghanistan at the moment. And I think it's important that every country now delivers. As I keep on saying, it is a shared responsibility. If anything, I think the Taliban have made life relatively easy because they've come in such a way. And another thing, I think it was understood that the Taliban were going to come into power in some form or another.
I'll come back to you. We are unfortunately short of time. Straight away, I go to Dr. Stacey. There is one very crucial point left to be discussed when it comes to the UN Drugs Control Agency. Afghanistan, according to that drug agency, is the source of the most of the world's heroin. Now, Zabiullah Mujahid pledged that Afghanistan would be free of narcotics. But we already see that the Taliban banned poppy growing in 2000 as well. Do you think they would be able to capitalize on this particular promise they have made now?
We have doubts about that. I mean, all the funds from the U.S. were frozen, and so they're short of immediate revenues. So it's going to be highly challenging for them to make good on that promise immediately. But there are bigger issues at stake. It's time for an international trusteeship led by the UN, supported by all the countries we've already discussed. Job number one is for the checkpoints to come down and for the Taliban to live up to their pronouncement of full amnesty. That has to be verified. Number two, the negotiation of a national unity government with a couple of female ministers, ideally, Taliban ministers, ministers partly from the former government, and even some new players from civil society and youth, who are the vast majority of the country. So these are the next steps. And then after that, we can get into things like, where is their revenue going to come from? And by the way, when the Taliban say, why are you leaving our country? We have told you you are all free and have full amnesty. Well, it's because of the past. The recent past.
Okay, Ms. Amina, Dr. Stacey, unfortunately, your point is well taken. I'll go with this point to Ms. Amina. Since we know that Taliban tried banning poppy back in 2000 as well, but they as they sought international legitimacy back then as well, but were faced with a popular backlash and later mostly changed their stance. What do you say? Is there any likelihood that they could fulfill this promise this time around?
I think they did not ask for legitimacy 2 decades ago. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, so I think the scenario was totally different, and as we're saying, this is now a new Taliban. Again, I feel they're going to deliver. Just one point I think that is important that I probably wasn't able to communicate because of the disruption was that, look, at the end of the day, regional countries and then the international community can only do so much. It is important for the Afghans to take ownership. Unless and until they do not accommodate each other and compromise, there will be no peace. And no regional country or international country can deliver peace. It is for the Afghans. As hard as it may be, the Afghans need to come together, period.
Ms. Amina Khan, Director, Center for Afghanistan, Middle East and Africa at the Institute of Strategic Studies, Islamabad. Thank you for your time at Newswire. And Dr. Jeffrey Stacey, former State Department official in the Obama administration and the United Nations lead consultant in Central and South Asia. Thank you very much for your time at Newswire as well. With this, we come to the end of today's Newswire. And in the next episode, we'll go deeper into looking into what exactly could transpire in the coming days and weeks regarding the situation in Afghanistan. For that, stay tuned.